Fiona Jeffrey yesterday in opening the show again pointed to the importance of responsible tourism. I just wanted to ask that if you are tweeting, please can you use the hashtag WTM as well as any other hashtag that you want to use. And we always get questions about whether the slides and the presentations will be available afterwards. They'll be on that legacy website, the one right at the bottom, on the website that the International Centre for Responsible Tourism runs with World Travel Market for these purposes. But I don't want to take any more of your time. I want to hand over to the chair for this session, Professor John Swarbrick from Manchester Metropolitan University. It's a real pleasure to have one of Britain's leading academics on sustainable tourism with us today to chair what I hope is going to be at least a slightly controversial set of presentations. We're going to start by looking at responsible skiing, then we're going to look at diving, and then we're going to look at mountaineering and trekking at the end. So Veronica, if you'd like to come. John, I don't know if you want to say anything while I just get Veronica's slideshow up.
Thank you for that, Harold. I was still trying to recognise the introduction. Can I do it from here? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a great pleasure. About 9 years ago, I remember writing a book on adventure tourism, which covered a lot of activities. At that time, it was just becoming recognised in the academic world how important activity tourism was going to be. And now it's massive. So I think it's a really opportune time for us to be looking at this. And that bit of useless waffle from me has led us beautifully to the point at which Veronica is ready to make her presentation. Veronica.
Morning. I believe that as our lives become increasingly individualistic, with people spending more time indoors and sedentary, with technology pervading our lives and a risk-adverse culture, the more people will seek something that takes them away from all of that. And skiing fulfills that need. People want the escape from their daily lives, the exhilaration of the speed and invigorating conditions, the achievement of mastering something new, and the pleasure and fun of a shared experience with friends and family. Skiers love challenge and want to maximise their time on the slopes. They cherish the mountain landscape and fresh air, and they adore great food. It's really important to remember these values and their reasons for engaging in the sport. If we over-mechanise, for example, we lose that escapism and damage the scenery that they love so much. But does it really differ from any other form of tourism? Well, it's similar in many ways, with large numbers of people visiting an area in a seasonal fashion. It brings exactly the same pressure on communities and transport, infrastructure and development, the same as beach tourism, for example. However, obviously today I'm looking at the specifics of skiing, and there are a few differences that make managing tourism to ski resorts a little different. So the mountain environment is very fragile. The flora and fauna develop slowly, and short growing seasons means it can take a long time to recover from any impact. Secondly is skiing's reliance on climate, temperature and weather. Climate is obviously the overall trends. Temperature, well, that can determine whether snow or rain falls. And weather is the day-to-day. For example, strong winds could close all the lifts. There really isn't another area of tourism that is 100% dependent on it. Thirdly, in common with the other sports here today, skiers are skilled consumers, meaning that every time they go back, they want to take on more challenge and get better. And this can create tremendous pressure on resorts to develop more and more and get bigger and bigger. And finally, of course, skiing has a requirement for infrastructure, for pistes, artificial snow, ski lifts, and of course the skiing itself, whether on or off-piste, needs management. But of course it's really important to remember that skiing is vitally important to communities that completely rely on it for the income and the very survival of the community. Lots of places were suffering from outmigration, being left with only older people, or becoming commuter villages. Skiing enables young people to stay in the place they were brought up, with aspirations for the future and viable work opportunities. Responsible tourism, as we know, is all about making better places for people to live in and better places for people to visit. And the fact remains that skiing and the income and opportunities it brings can make better places for people to live in. So it's all about balance. And whose responsibility is it then to manage the activity, and how can we minimise any negative impacts. Well, in some research carried out just recently by Responsible Skiing and ABTA, we asked skiers and snowboarders who they thought had responsibility for looking after the mountains. It was a checkbox answer, and this is how they assigned responsibility. I think it's unsurprising that the respondents would indeed associate the resort management authorities and the ski operating companies to have the most influence on the way the mountains are organised and managed. They'd see them as the guardians of the mountains. But it's interesting they placed themselves next, which is really encouraging and represents a big opportunity to demonstrate to skiers and boarders that the choices they make and their behaviours can have influence. And in the UK outbound market, about half of skiers make independent travel arrangements, half still book packages. So tour operators can influence that half of the outbound market, and as such can have a key role, not only in the destinations and accommodations offered, but more importantly, how resorts are presented. So how can the resorts manage skiing better? There are a whole host of actions here, but taking a few examples. Pistes, for example, they can be created using a soil push method, where you lift the turf, do any machine grading underneath, and replace the turf, meaning all biodiversity remains intact. You can create local seed mixes, so any reseeding requirements are far more successful and uniquely adapted. Lifts can be selected that have the least visual impact. Lift housing can be low-lying, even partially underground, and built using local materials. They can be run off renewable energy. You can recoup the heat caused by the machinery, and you can actually generate more electricity than the lift itself uses. If a reservoir is required for artificial snow, for example, it can actually be made to create a new habitat or a summer beauty spot. Rivers can be assessed to ensure that any water takeoff doesn't impact the watercourse, and river water should be filtered so that any additional nutrients naturally occurring don't change the vegetation. It, of course, can be run off renewables, and machinery can be removed in summer or pipes buried underground so that the mountains are pristine for summer tourism. When planning skiing areas, it's important to assess the flora and animal feeding routes. Fragile areas can be roped off and patrolled. What I'm particularly interested in, though, is innovation, to think of new ways to provide fun and challenge without impact to the landscape. For example, freeride areas, they're avalanche secured and safe, but nothing else is done. No piste preparation, no grooming. Skiers, they have the fun and challenge they're after. Conditions are always different, but no pistes need to be created, so no landscape impact, and there are no costs associated with maintenance. Fun parks, they can provide challenge all day. Piste kilometres are not the answer to everything. But that, unfortunately, is largely how resorts are presented, which leads me to my next point. Tour operators. I already mentioned they do exercise control in the resorts and accommodations they offer, but I think they have a key role in the way they present resorts. Communications seem to have stood still. The brochures look the same as they did 30 years ago. You can't tell apart resorts that manage skiing well and take responsibility. They are presented as being all about piste kilometres, and key information that could change perceptions is actually missing. Nonetheless, skiers do love the statistics, and they like to know the amount of terrain, the reds, the blues, the blacks. It's critical when they select resorts and can really spoil a holiday if they get it wrong. But if we use statistics more cleverly and provide some different information, such as the amount of safe off-piste or freeride areas, the piste density, the queue times, it will showcase those resorts that give challenge without impact to the landscape and care about the resort experience. If tour operators improve their information, then skiers and snowboarders can make better decisions. And managing the activity well, using some of those actions I mentioned, provides multiple benefits and makes good business sense too. For example, The companies, well, they save money and reduce their operating costs. And of course, it's not in their interest to contribute to climate change. Their reputation will be enhanced since they have a distinctive product offering and be seen as a company that takes responsibility. The place, the mountains, rivers, lakes, wildlife and fresh air, the home of the local community, will stay beautiful, managed and protected for the future. Snow can hide a lot, and it's in summer when you really see the impact of skiing. If the operations are managed well, they will be kept pristine, offering communities wider opportunities for summer tourism and the associated revenue benefits. The destination, well, that will now have a differentiated product, giving competitive advantage over those places that have been spoilt or who don't offer the challenge. If tour operators play their role and start giving skiers better information and showcase good resorts, they then help the skiers make better choices. And then finally, the skiers. They gain the challenge and terrain they love, but the mountain scenery that they value so much stays beautiful. The skiers will return, since they won't have exhausted all the terrain and will still get challenge and tell everyone about their experiences, and more economic benefits from tourism can be accrued. So there are many ways in which the management of skiing can be improved, and if done well, can make better places for people to live in and better places for people to visit. Thank you.
Because our third presenter needs a little bit of time to prepare his presentation. So we have a little bit of time after the next speaker and then the main time after the third speaker. Thank you. Let's just give this time now for Claire, who works currently for Hidden Britain, but he's going to talk to us today about diving.
Indeed, good morning. I am going to talk about the role of operators specifically in responsible diving this morning. A little bit of background. I used to be a scuba instructor, which led me to an interest in the role that tourism could play in marine conservation and to a study of the ways to improve the impact that divers have on the environment, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So, way back in the 60s when Jacques Cousteau and various action TV series made diving popular, we started to see a steady increase in diving worldwide. That's from 1970 to date. And that inevitably is going to mean large numbers of divers on fairly crowded sites, which is going to cause damage. And it means that operators and divers are going to be out there looking for new, uncrowded, pristine sites. Diving and snorkeling do cause some damage, some localised damage. I think we have to accept that. And they can cause disturbance to wildlife, like that poor old turtle there that's being taken for a ride. But I would argue that the money that comes from diving and snorkeling can be channelled to the local economy and to conservation, and that can outweigh any localised damage. Equally important is the passion that a lot of divers develop for the marine environment, which can last a lifetime. When you've got large numbers of divers visiting a small area of reef or another fragile environment, operators need to be involved in the management. It's not just up to local authorities like marine parks. You need to protect the resource that you're selling. And there's lots of ways that places use to limit damage, like infrastructure, mooring buoys for boats to tie up to instead of using anchors is one. And other things like limiting the number of divers on a reef, limiting certain fragile areas to divers who with more experience, who it's expected would have better skills, closing large sections of an area to visitors and creating these sacrificial zones where you accept basically that damage will occur, but the rest of the reef or area is closed, so that sacrificial area is for the greater good, as it were. And all of these are options that work in some places, but not everywhere. We've got a huge range of divers and snorkelers, from the large numbers jumping off cruise ships with limited skills, let's say, and limited knowledge of the environment, through to real expert divers who've got an encyclopedic knowledge of the species and environments. They're willing to pay a lot of money, travel a long way to visit really pristine, rare environments, and then everything in between. So ultimately what we're looking for is this balance between happy visitors, happy fishes, money coming in to the local economy, and towards conservation funds. So those management options I talked about just a moment ago apply in some places, but my argument is that there's one thing that we can do that applies everywhere and always makes a difference, which is education. It can also be called information or propaganda. I'm happy to call it propaganda because it's about changing people's beliefs. Calling it education for now, this is something that can work everywhere with everyone as long as it's pitched right. It can reduce damage, it can increase support for conservation, and it can make for happier customers, crucially. I think one great advantage diving has, maybe even over the other sports that we're talking about today, is that we've got basically a captive audience. Usually you're on a boat, people can't really escape. You can direct your messages about behaviour, the environment, information about what people are going to see to them fairly in this captive way. And also, they're usually with a professional. They've had to have some training to get there. And they're with someone who's guiding them, taking them through it, and can really make a difference to the way they behave, what they understand, and how they feel about what they're doing. And I think that's a massive advantage. So you'll often see these kind of adverts about act now, limited time offer from people trying to sell you stuff, raise money from you, or change your behaviour. And the reason for that is because it works. Those people know that good intentions aren't always translated into good deeds. But if we're then given an immediate opportunity to act on information that we're given, on our intentions, then the message goes much deeper and lasts much longer. If you're told something, a bit of information, it can go straight through, in one ear and out the other. But if it's accompanied by an emotional, hands-on experience, the message goes much deeper and stays with people up to a lifetime. So if good environmental education happens at the same time as an amazing dive experience, it's likely not only to have an effect on divers' immediate impact, but also their long-term commitment to marine conservation. So you could say that being on a dive boat provides the best possible conditions, really, for creating the perfect visitor. Someone who understands the environment they're visiting, knows how to behave in it and has the skills not to damage it, and also cares about its conservation. Finally then, this is a brief headline result from the study I mentioned that I did, where dive masters were asked to do a briefing to tell people some practical ways that they could avoid kicking and touching the reef, and a little bit about coral and how fragile it is. You can see that there was quite a dramatic decrease in the number of times people touched the reef from a normal briefing through to this quite practical, immediate, how to change things briefing. So education really can make a difference. I think the problem is for a lot of dive guides and operators is that they think education is preaching, it's boring, it's creating bored students like this, but it really doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be didactic. It's something that can really improve visitors' experience, makes it stand out. Divers really enjoy being informed in a lively way. And it's not just up to operators on the ground, it's up to the originating countries' operators as well to support them, providing information before and after a trip on actions they could take, local rules and regulations they'll be expected to follow, and crucially things they can do once they get back home so that they've got an opportunity to act and follow up on that emotion that they created in situ. At the end of the day, it's not education, it's good customer service, and it's going to improve divers' experience, keep them coming back, and protect the experience that they travel for. Thank you.